It's Ross Pollard and his bare facts. So bad, so bad. It's Ross Pollard with the bare facts.
Welcome, guys. After speaking with John Maloney a few weeks ago, I thought that we'd go back within the organisation of the Microflight Paramedics. We've got with us this week a very special guest, someone who is moving away from air ambulance, but someone who has had a lot of time at air ambulance, and I thought we could have a chat with him about all and everything, and hopefully we can get some knowledge and some tidbits from him. So I'd like to welcome Justin Nunan. Justin, welcome.
G'day, Ross. How you going?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, good, mate. Good.
How's retirement treating you?
Yeah, really good. Really good. I'm that busy. I was wondering how I actually had time to go to work.
You're not missing the 4:00 jobs in the afternoon?
No. Not the neither's the family either. So
good.
Getting home at a sort of reasonable hour is good too.
So you mentioned before 36 years in the job in total.
Yes, joined in '86.
What did you do previous?
I did a couple of years as an enrolled nurse at the Austin, working in spinal, and they had like a trauma centre there with the orthopaedics, both paediatric. I did that to actually make my CV better so I could get a job with the ambulance.
Right.
Before that, I was a tradesman, an engineer's pattern maker, tool maker.
Okay.
And I tried to get an ambulance and I just wasn't meeting any of the... I tried about 4 times to get an ambulance and I just wasn't even getting an interview.
Really?
I did the nursing and I got an interview. And they said, we don't like nurses because they're hard to train. So then I went off. I actually was in the Air Force Reserve for a little while. I did motor transport. So I learned to drive all these different vehicles, including ambulances. And then I went back to ambulance with the improved CV. And I think that probably just a bit of reserve work and the nursing and the trade background. And the fact that I was 24, married with little kids. They just said, no worries, they gave me a job. But it was about 4 applications before I got in. So
what was the time span of doing the nursing and the trialling out and then doing those other careers? What age did you sort of become interested in ambulance?
I was about 20. I saw a guy get badly injured in a big foundry in Richmond.
Yeah.
Ambulance turned up, Micah turned up. The guy was very badly injured.
Yeah.
And that was my first. I'd never sort of really come across ambulance, never even considered it.
Yeah.
Engineering in Australia was dying. So all those big factories and manufacturing was disappearing.
The inner city type factories.
Well, nationally, not just inner city, but nationally. And patent making it's now considered a lost trade.
Yep.
Although it's making a bit of a comeback. But I had to sort of think about, I had to do something else.
Yeah.
And I saw an ambulance crew working and I went, and I looked into it and then I found out, sitting in Dallas Brooks Hall in those days, used to go and sit there with about 400 or 500 people and do the written exams, and they used to do a verbal dictation exam as well. That they were selecting 10 or 20 people.
So that's a lot of people, isn't it? To get through it. And was it just the written, or were there other stages that you had to go through?
They often did the exam. They vetoed a lot of the applications, and then they got people to do the written paper. And it was a guy called Liam McCarthy used to stand up, and there was Dallas Brooks Hall was packed. And he just did dictation out of a business book or something, a book on business studies. And it was about 15 minutes. That was probably the hardest bit, actually writing down, because then they actually look what you wrote down. And it's an incredibly probably powerful tool for selecting people.
A test of how articulate you are and...
Spelling, how you can write, how you understand, all that sort of stuff. It was a really interesting test, actually. They cut it out after a few years.
So just back before that, so you're interested in ambulance. What was it about the job that you saw that interested you, the injured guy that you saw at the job?
Just that they really just clicked, like they really knew what they were doing. There was a nurse, the factory nurse, it was Vickers Royal, it was a big factory. They had a nurse there, she came out, she just about fainted.
Yeah.
Blokes there really crook, and the ambulance crew came, and just the way they spoke, really quiet, calm, and they just got a huge amount of stuff done really quickly. The Micah crew were really good. I sort of recognised them when I first started in the job.
Don't recall the names?
No.
Okay.
But yeah, that really piqued an interest in the job.
And were you where did you do? So, what year did you start? Did you commence as a
86?
86
ambulance officer. Started out at Waverley with Alan Jackson as my car coach in those days.
But did you do some theoretical training before you went out on the road? So
that was the old associate diploma. So we did 6 weeks at the school.
Down in Albert Park there, or
no, Punt Road. I was at Vale Street Babies Home. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, I go back a fair way. In third year, we went to the AOTC at Vale Street.
Yeah.
No, sorry, at Queen's Road.
Yes. Yeah. So 6 weeks, and then you're out and about.
Yeah, and then we were out and back for a few months, and then came back. So the associate diploma didn't really change much after that until I went sort of pre-degree.
What was your first job that you went to?
No idea.
No idea?
No. We did the 8, 10, 14 in those days. So,
okay.
And I don't think I had a few weeks of doing really routine transport work, not doing a great deal of anybody really very sick. And about the second or third week, I had a patient in APO. I had no idea what I was doing. She was unwell too.
When you used to do the transport shifts, you talked to a lot of guys of
crib shift,
your level or your experience, like, even talking to Peter Hoffman and a few others. That was good to help you just without the pressure of the medical emergency, just chatting with patients. And
if you had a good CI, I had a couple of good CIs. They thought to you, this is where you learn to get that sense of the detective, and how to talk to people about illness and stuff. It's a really good model. It's similar to what they do with interns, doctors in hospital. They make them go around and talk to patients. It's a really good way of actually getting around, figuring out ways to talk to people who are unwell.
Some names of some of your CIs. You mentioned one before.
Alan Jackson, he was a good start for me because we're all super keen, and he just settled you down and just just walk, just take it easy, calm, relax.
Who else?
There's a few about Jacko. Then I had Graham Fallett at City Branch, and then Jerry O'Brien, who was a really good ambo. Jerry O'Brien. So it was Graham Fallett. And then we were basically at the end, halfway through second year, we were working with other students.
Yeah.
So it wasn't really till 992, really. I went to Broadmeadows branch, so I moved out that western side and out to West Coburg.
Yeah.
And I got a position at Broady, and then I found myself in a really quite interesting alumni there. So that was Tony Walker, Mark Lamb, Danny McGinniskin, and then we all came really under the influence of people like Peter Cole, Danny Egan, Mel Coles, Kevin Carter, those sort of guys really taught us a lot about the job.
But before we go to where your interest goes into Micah and then other areas, was there a job that you remember as a road paramedic that really stuck out for you? One of interest or one that?
I was with Dick Prisgrove that night. And it was at City Branch. It was absolutely pouring rain. I mean, absolutely pouring rain. And it was a head-on, and we had 9 Signal 1s. There was 2 carloads of 18, 19-year-olds, all blind drunk, and in Punt Road, just near the Yarra River there.
Right.
And we had 9 Signal 1s, like 5 of them unconscious, 2 of them non-breathing. We had a hell of a time that night. And people had thought they were doing the right thing, but dragged them all out onto the road in the pouring rain. And, then another ambulance eventually turned up, and then Micah 2 came up eventually, and we ended up with enough ambulances there. But
what did you have in your kit back then for that sort of job?
A BP cuff and some bandages, some Penthrane, the Oxysaver, which we were really all very good at using, so we could use that to support ventilation, that sort of stuff. But not very much.
Okay.
Yeah.
So picking them up, doing what you can, and getting them to one of the facilities in the area.
Yeah, DRABC.
Yeah.
Yep. But just doing a little for a lot until we got enough resources there. It was a formative job for me, I think.
Yeah. Affected you or
no? Well, I thought at the time I had a bit of a sense of like you go along, you don't really know how you're going. And then I did that job, and I went, well, I'm not going bad.
Yeah,
I've got a bit of an idea how to do this job. So for me, it was formative, and it gave me a bit of an idea that I was actually going okay.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
If you want to learn how to be extraordinary and achieve high success and a winning mindset, comment on this episode, Ice Bath, at the Barefax Podcast on YouTube or at the Barefax Podcast on Instagram, and I'll give you instant access to my latest ebook, The Top 10 Benefits of Ice Baths for Extraordinary Results. Tip 5 is my personal favourite. Let me know what your top tip is. So was it jobs like that tickled your fancy about then trying out for Micah so you could take
and I was getting encouraged. So in those days, the Micah crews that attended, like Micah 1 particularly and Micah 3, so we had blokes like Bill Barger, Peter Collins, Cicella was at Micah 1 in the city, and then went to Micah 2. But like those sort of guys, they were getting encouraged by the station officers in those days to pick out people and then mentor them and encourage them to do Micah. So I got, especially blokes like Collins and Barger and those sort of guys said to me, you should be doing Micah.
What year did you get into Micah?
1992.
92, okay.
Yeah, so 30 years on Micah this year.
So there was, when you got into the job, there was some pretty big incidents, weren't there, that took place? So the Russell Street bombing and Hoddle Street, Queen Street.
Yeah, missed all those, luckily.
Yeah, probably a good thing. And then I suppose Wall Street.
So Tony Walker, I know, did that one.
Right.
And there was a few others, I think, that were involved there.
Dave Llewellyn, I believe.
Yeah.
So how did the training go when you started? What was the structure back then?
Well, it was just that you did the selection was the old stage one. Mm-hmm. So you put 20 people in a room on a Monday and the last 10 standing on Friday went on to the Micah course.
Right.
It was very, very competitive and the selection was really difficult just to get onto the course. And then we did basically all of the schooling but with very little release onto the Micah units. I think probably because we'd worked on I was 6 years in the job. I sort of been working with Micah crews the whole time. So I didn't really need to do a lot of, like we were working with Micah crews all the time. And then we went out onto the Micah trucks with the CI. His first CI was Greg Cicella.
Really?
Yeah. He was very, very good at the job.
Yeah.
But he was a pretty tough CI.
Yeah. That was at 1?
At Micah 2 at the Alfred.
Oh, right.
And we were really busy, so we had a ton of work, a lot of really sick patients. Because we were seeing sick patients a lot more in those days.
How many units back then were there in total?
Micah 8 was 8.
Was the top one, okay.
Yeah.
And back then, was that because you weren't on the grid, there was an AMPDS, so you were reserved? Were you travelling greater distances?
Yeah, we were. So Micah 2, we were heading down to sort of the bridge at Mordialloc.
Right.
And then out into the, out to Glen Waverley and even beyond sometimes. Sometimes backing up other Micah trucks at Bingles on freeways and stuff.
And unlike today, a greater number of APO patients, asthmatic patients.
Yeah, heroin overdoses all the time.
Because that was a Micah skill back then.
Micah skill set, but we got really good. You really honed those airway skills. Mm-hmm. When we're doing even ambulance officers had really good airway skills because we're seeing heroin overdoses a lot, and their skills with their airway, like it ventilate someone who wasn't breathing. If you can't do it, these people used to die. So ambos were really good at it.
Where were you running around? Like, was it the heroin overdoses? Was all down around St Kilda when it was the Wild West? Or?
Well, yeah, you'd follow it was almost a sense you were following the dealers around.
Really?
So wherever the dealers were going, we essentially had a heroin overdose after heroin, especially when you had a fresh batch on the streets.
So like 92, 93, 94 this was?
Yeah. And then Micah 1 around Fitzroy, up into Carlton, back into North Melbourne, back around the city, laneways,
So 1 was after 2?
Yes, went to Micah 1 after. So I finished with Greg Cicella, and then I went to Micah 1 with Dave Llewellyn, which was an absolute circus.
Yeah.
He's just such a funny guy to work with and a lot less serious than Greg. And he just had this really unusual training style as well. You'd be a complete disaster and just be flying out of control. You just land, say you're having fun yet.
More traumas then?
Yeah.
In the city?
Yeah, we did a lot of trauma. We used to do a lot of, the cardiology was really interesting. We were seeing patients at conscious VT, you'd be doing one a week.
Yeah.
Like in a doctor's surgery, patients sitting up with VT with no blood pressure, and we were giving lignocaine, which apparently didn't work, and it used to revert everybody. And we had beryllium in cardiac arrest, which was we called embalming fluid. I don't think I ever had a result from beryllium, but we used to give it just before we stopped doing a resus on people that had died. But we were doing a lot of complete heart blocks, and bradycardias, tachyarrhythmias, really sick AMIs. You learned that the left anterior descending artery. This was pre-12 leads, so we used to sort of move leads around the chest and stuff, and you get a bit of a brief idea, and you go, this is an LAD. We're going to be dancing here. Get your dancing shoes on. But the cardiology was really hard. We did a lot of really sick patients, and then respiratory. So it was back in the day when we had terribly unwell, poorly managed asthmatics in the community, and we were seeing
not enough preventative, or why was that?
They were just taking their puffers. So preventative. And that was a thing that actually developed after I did MICA. That started to come out in maybe the mid-90s. So we were seeing like non-breathing, respiratory arrested, tight asthmatics.
So a lot of intubations.
Yeah, we're intubating them, and then some of them, after we intubated them, they would die. Good brick bag.
Wow.
Yeah.
And nothing else you had in your kit was able to...
Look, sometimes when you got a brick bag asthmatic, we had Ventolin IV and aminophylline. But when they were brick bagged, it's more then become the cardiac.
Right.
Yeah, they raised into thoracic pressures, and hypoxia is that's where you learn about what does hypoxia do, and what does inability to ventilate someone.
And you guys didn't have end tidal then, did you?
Nope.
No.
And I was well into my MICA, well down the track in my MICA career before we had that. So it was all auscultation and rise and fall of the chest. And
manoeuvring the tube in, the suite of drugs you had was not as expansive or as friendly as you had later in your career?
Well, we were intubating sick elderly APOs. We used to intubate. We used to basically talk the tube through. Because we didn't have CPAP, and we had the oxysaver, and we had a sense that we shouldn't intubate them, but that you got them just florid unconscious APOs who were also badly managed pre-hospital. So a lot of these people weren't getting managed very well. Or we had ethnic communities in the northwestern suburbs that really didn't see doctors.
Right, or didn't understand,
poorly compliant, whatnot. So you get them with, pitting edema and fluid right up above their flanks externally, and then their lungs would just fill up with fluid. So they were terribly difficult to manage, but we'd be intubating them with very little. And then trauma and patients requiring intubation for airway and breathing, and some sort of targeted, and although we didn't have end tidal, but some sort of getting SATs and stuff that would be helpful was just with morphine Valium. I learned so we used to give 5 and 5. Sometimes with bigger patients, we had learned from some of the people at Air Wing that these patients you need to give 10 and 10. So 10 of Valium, 10 of Morph.
And you're watching that BP quite judiciously at the same time?
Yeah, but this was on multi-traumas and stuff,
right.
So that we were getting taught then that airway before breathing and circulation.
Okay.
Manage the breathing, and then oxygenate these people, and then fill them with fluid and blood pressures and stuff. But the morphine Valium, routinely we were seeing elevated blood pressures because of the raping of the airway.
Yeah.
And then we did that really well. We went to Morph and Medaz, which worked better.
Yeah.
Medaz with a better synergic effect with the Morph Medaz. And we had patients lying down a little bit still, but you had to get the tube in pretty smartly because the window was only about 15, 20 seconds.
So you're watching those cords flutter around and...
No, like a lot of patients went really quite still.
Right.
As soon as you touched them, they would clamp down.
Okay.
So you had to tube them. You couldn't muck around. The synergic effect only lasted a short period of time.
Yeah.
And then they'd start to breathe and move around a little bit.
You took a bit of a different path, same as, Darren Hodge was the same. You went to CSO before Air, didn't you?
Yeah, I guess I was working on the MICA as a CI really quickly after I qualified.
Yeah.
We had the PRU thing started under Jack Furman, which I thought was a disaster. I think the breaking down of the MICA, I don't think it's ever really recovered fully.
Right.
I think the PRU model is not the right way to go.
So there was one, was it Coolaroo and Bundoora?
Well, no, they got like MICA 1 had a ALS, but had just had an ambulance officer on it.
Right.
And they just made more MICA units by just denuding the MICA trucks. So and there was a promise we're going to get a paramedic to every patient, and that didn't work. So then they basically gave everybody in the service paramedic badges. It was just a political expediency.
Right.
So yeah, at the same people that encouraged me to do MICA then I was out training students all the time, and it was a pretty tough time. 93, really through to 96, 97 was a pretty tough time on MICA. The MICA paramedics were left on our own. We were responding on our own, and the CSO model was taking off, and they really needed to try and fix the problem. They really wanted good CSOs out in the field, and that's when Collins particularly and Bill Barger and Greg Cooper and Ian Patrick I started to sort of have them sort of say to me, you need to start applying for a CSO position. We want something like you out in the West.
So when was that? When did that kick off for you?
I've been on MICA. I think I went there in about 2007, 2008 CSOs. That was really good for me. Because...
Sorry, when did you say 2007?
92, 97.
97, okay.
Yeah, 97, 98.
Yeah.
So then I did that for about 6 years. But I came under some really interesting leadership there. You're talking Ian Patrick, Greg Cooper,
yeah,
Barger, Peter Collins, and then you're coming under the influence of some other absolute gurus about the place, like Russ Nelson and these sort of people. I learned a lot about quality. I learned a lot about MICA. I learned a lot about how to train and how to supervise, and it was a really tough job. There was a lot to be done, because at the same time they were introducing ALS across the service.
So you enjoyed it?
Loved it.
Yeah.
Yep. I did miss, after a while though, there was some politics going on and some stuff I didn't agree with at the time. There was a move. There wasn't enough people applying for MICA, so they said, we'll decrease the entry standards for MICA. And I said, well, we all disagreed with that. We've got to encourage people to work harder. And so I think people weren't working as hard to get on because it was becoming easier to get on. And I said, well, my feeling was always that if you decrease the standard, then as the CSO, I'm going to have to manage it later on. And we were right.
Okay.
There's a definite drop. And it became a lot of hard work for the CSO. So the CSO, my thing about the CSO was my job was to go out and help people do their job as well as they possibly could. And a lot of that time that I should have been doing that was actually performance managing people.
Okay.
That probably shouldn't have been in roles that they were in, because I'm just making terrible errors. So there was
that at ALS level as well?
At both, yeah.
Right.
The ALS thing, so a lot of young people, a lot of older paramedics and stuff were struggling with the ALS, and that was probably where I felt I was doing the most good.
Yeah.
Helping people get through their ALS. There was a lot of older paramedics who's having been an older paramedic. A lot of these guys like Kevin Carter and Howard Smith and a lot of those older guys out, St Albans way, and that they actually came and said to me, we want to stay relevant in the job. We want to leave the job with a good reputation. I said, well, I'll stick with you. We'll get it done. Well, don't worry. That'll be, we'll see that done. And they did. They really worked hard at it and they got through it.
When did you get interested in heading out to the airway?
It was more about getting back on the tools, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I just missed being on the tools, and I had a good mate in Den Morrissey and Matt Davidson. Matt Davidson and I both started the job together first.
Really?
Yeah. And Matt had been there, and I used to see Matt a lot, and Den Morrissey and Mark Lamb and a few other guys that I'd worked with out west, and they were all encouraging me, you need to come back. I think I was mostly attracted to it was pretty cutting edge compared to what was going on elsewhere. And the acuity of the patient, like the patient care acuity and stuff, was really interesting. There was also a little concept of the air wing people were sort of starting to drive and test pilot stuff that was going to come onto Micah on road.
Such as?
Well, the RSI, and although we were just doing the introduction to RSI, that was going to be a lot more difficult. Initially, they thought that would be very simple because people had been intubating patients with, morphin-modaz. They thought they'd just give us succinylmethone and we wouldn't have any trouble. But we smelled a rat there, and Terry Marshall and those guys developed that book with Jeff Keneally, and they built up that program for RSI, which was really a masterpiece. The introduction to RSI and across Micah, we went really back to basics and back to airway and that sort of stuff.
So when was your application for air?
I failed a couple of times, so I couldn't get through the physical.
Really?
Yeah, couldn't get I couldn't get that emaciated cancer patient.
So how many times did you have to do the scenario then, if that was the case?
I only did the scenario once.
Okay.
I never really got. I got through all the other parts of the application. It was the third. I got through on the third time.
Okay. So when did you start, and who did you start with?
So 2002, 2003, with Tim Styring. Tim and I, we got through that year.
Yeah.
And I was with Jim Sams.
Lovely Jim Sams.
Yeah, what a great instructor. He was exactly what I needed. I'm very, I'm a bit right-brained.
Right.
A bit intuitive, a little bit sort of tend to rely on sort of flow of the seat of my pants a little. I have a tendency to be a bit overly creative.
Yeah.
And therefore make it at that pointy end of the business, and your self-analysis, that you tend to make errors of lack of precision.
Okay.
And then you work with someone like Jim Sams, who was just incredibly left-brained, highly organised, brilliant planner, and retaught me again how to actually go through the business of looking after someone at the Micah standard.
How long were you with Jim for?
We had pretty quiet time, so I think I did an extra month. I think it was 4 months. Mm-hmm. And then he let me loose on the public.
Any memorable jobs with Jim?
There was a couple of funny jobs.
Yeah.
But no, just a good mix of jobs. Yeah. And the funny little mistakes that I made. And he used to just look at me and go, "Where did you go? What rabbit hole did you sort of go down to lead you to that error?" Like he said, "I didn't actually see you actually thinking that you were going to make that error." And that's the sort of stuff that I actually carried a lot of what he used to do and how he trained, and I was heavily involved in training students after that.
Yeah.
And a lot of the stuff I learned from him, absolutely, I carried into. So one of the things that he told me was that you've stuck your hand up as a subject matter expert, so the training's going to be a little bit different. He said, "I'm not going to teach you how to do Micah. I'm just going to teach you how to work on the helicopter. So I can't change the way you." He said, you've got a different style to me. You have a different way you go about it. He said, I've just got to sit back and watch. And he said, and then we'll discuss the jobs later and we'll try and work out how you're making all these fantastic mistakes.
So give us a Jim Sams tip. Give us something that you've carried on and that you believe is...
Well, really key thing for me was he said, when the phone rings... At that point, you must start planning the job right through to actually landing on the destination helipad. Mm-hmm. So don't do the job we're going to fly the job. Then I'll assess the patient. Then we'll get airborne. Then we'll fly. Then we'll land. Then we'll hand over. Logistically, you have to start looking at the whole job in terms of the aviation side of it. Refueling, timing, what equipment we've got. Do we need more? Do we have to restaging, which is all common things that microflight paramedics do all the time. Mm. But he said from the moment the phone rings, because there might be things that you may need to take with you that are not normally on the machine. There may be things that you may need to talk to the pilot and crew about that they might have an awareness of the patient needs before you get airborne. So he was big on that.
And a different model when you were first out there, wasn't it? It was 4 on 495, 4 days off, say, for example, and then you had 4 on Air Micah, didn't you?
Yep.
Where you were responding in the car and getting flogged and then coming back.
Doing fixed wing.
On a non-pressurised aircraft.
No, I did work in air ambulance for a little while as a flight coordinator and as a flight paramedic. Yeah. But that was back before there was even a course.
Right.
And that was unpressurised. That was moderately patients.
Titans, was it?
Yeah, the 404s. And then when I started air ambulance, they'd just gone to the new King Airs.
That you 4 on. So obviously, when you're doing your 4 on 4 on 5, pretty exciting. Flying in a helicopter, primaries, but also the police work as well.
We had to do the police work. Yeah, so operate the night sun and all that sort of stuff.
How did you find the 4 on the Air Mica? Was it pretty tiring? Because you would run around all night on the road as well, weren't you?
Yeah, so because I've been CSOing, the single responding in the car was not really a issue.
Okay.
And I didn't mind. I actually quite like being busy. The fixed wing job, so you'd be racing around all night, and then they'd urgently want you back to do a fixed wing job. And some of the fixed wing jobs we were doing were as sick, if not sicker, than the jobs we were doing primary-wise. So to get sent to Kickertin along west to get a patient who is now profoundly shocked and septic, with maybe a respiratory component, who is not intubated and has got a 20 gauge in the back of their hand, in a little country hospital where the GP, as soon as you walk in, he walks out. They don't actually get any sicker than that.
Okay.
So clearly some of the sickest patients we were doing were on fixed wing, so I actually quite enjoyed the fixed wing side of it, and I didn't have a sort of an anti sort of fixed wing feel at all. Yeah.
So then, obviously, at transition, I think it was around 2008, 2009, where HEMS 5 come online, and then obviously there's HEMS 3 and HEMS 2. When did you... So you work in the new model as well at Essendon. When did you then transition up to Bendigo? Was it 2012 or 13?
Yeah, about 2012. I've been there about 10 years.
And why was that?
Well, I was asked to then work on... do the training to work on HEMS 2. So I'd done the CHC training. Yeah. So I was doing filling in down there.
Yeah.
And it was a different operation. It was quite different from working at the police. And the work was quite different as well.
How so?
Longer.
Right.
And then down there we were doing a lot more rescue work. Mm-hmm. But also we were getting up into remote areas, and I think you have a job with into some of these logging hutches and the logging camps and stuff, and you wouldn't get... They only had communication with sat phones if they had them, and you get into people that had sort of graders or bulldozers roll down hills and you didn't know that they were badly injured. Then when you got there, often you'd winch in with a little backpack and the patient was in a bucket, and you really had to sort of really work hard. And so I found that really interesting. I hadn't had a lot of exposure to that in Melbourne. And it was also a different aircraft working in. So when HEMS 5 and HEMS 4 come online, I did a lot of time down at HEMS 4. So I got approached and said, look, we need some senior people down there. And I wasn't that keen, because I had the kids I had the teenage house full of teenage children, and I wasn't that keen on it. But they just said, look, we'll make it worth your while money-wise. And I went, I wasn't particularly interested in that either. But I found working down HEMS 4 was interesting too. So that was another experience altogether. I hadn't worked much at HEMS 3, but position was coming available there. And I had a couple of mates who were working up there and said, oh, you'll love it up here, So I went up there, and HEMS 3 was different again. So working HEMS 4, long haul, a lot of transfers, a lot of really desperately unwell patients. I did a couple of really hairy winches in the Grampians.
Really? The Grampians of all places?
Yeah, so I had one that sticks out, I guess, is a mountain climber he was lead climber in a group of about 5 at Mount Abrupt, which is it's very high, Mount Abrupt, in the upper section of it. And he was the lead climber, and they were on one rope, cleating in as they went up, and he fell. And then as he came down, he became inverted, and he was actually swung out on the rope, and it pulled tight. And then he swung head down and face first into the rock face below the second climber, and grossly bilaterally compounded fractured arm, because he put his arms out to protect himself. And then he smashed his face in, fractured jaw, poor airway, and severe head injury. So they'd lowered him down, and I had to winch onto that little ledge about halfway down.
Right.
You can only can really inch on the helicopter's not high enough cable to get you onto it from above. They have to sort of put you down right on the edge of it, and then you've actually got to sort of get your footing and grab hold of little trees and stuff there, and then make sure that everything's sort of secured on the ground. Then you can unhook. If you just unhook and you could fall off.
And how far would you be falling?
Only about 400 or 500 feet.
Yeah. So enough to, that's it.
Yeah. I don't know if you know Mount Abrupt at all.
Yeah.
It's really rugged country in there and very, very high. Very difficult to get helicopters in close there. So, and we had to move this guy. So we had to belay him back down to that ledge. We had to make up a belaying system with the mountain climbers because we had to have him in a stretcher. And I elected not to intubate him. He needed it, but we just put him on his side in the stretcher, and we just had an ambulance crew was able to walk up there, and you come along a path along the front edge of the cliff. It takes a long time. They had a little bit of suction stuff, so we just managed his airway and his jaw and stuff. But we had to belay him back to that point where the helicopter could pick him up because we couldn't swing the hook in, and we didn't do that belay training when we're attached to the helicopter like they do in New South Wales. So it was sort of, I had a couple of really good mountain climbers there. The hook came down, I hooked up, and then they, as we started to winch, they had then unhooked the stretcher from their belaying lines and then tag line me up. But I went straight up.
Yeah.
I didn't swing out. But as soon as I was off the ground, I know it was Andrew McCall was driving that day, and he backed away. So he picked me up and then backed away. It was Nathan Triffett, actually. He's a ripper bloke, Nathan, very skillful. And they backed away, and I found myself sort of 500, 600 feet up, coming up to the helicopter, and then got the guy on the door. Then we had to land, and there was no ambulance crew. We landed on that road, the Southern Grampians Road or whatever, a little dirt road, and there was no one there. And I said, we've got to RSI this guy now. And so Andrew McCall was helping with the airway and bag valve mask, and Nathan, who had never done an RSI before, was drawing up the drugs and going, what do I do? And I remember it was a pretty stressful sort of for them, and being remote. And we got this guy tubed, and then of course he blew a lung, and we had to land at Horsham to get fuel. And then it was southerly, so it was a long, like an hour, 20-minute flight from Horsham into Melbourne with this guy. He was really unwell.
And you're tired enough as it is with all your precision of your logistics of the winching and the height and all that sort of stuff. So what time of day did that happen at?
9 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
We knocked off about 7 o'clock that night. Yeah, when we basically got down the Alfred quickly, it was the old paper case sheet, just quickly did a case sheet, then jumped in and we flew home. And then by the time we got home, it was sort of 7 o'clock that night. That job particularly, if I go back to what Jim Sams had been really good on me about, he said, see the whole job from the moment the phone rings to the moment you're landing at the Alfred, have an understanding of develop an understanding, and you must develop a plan. And planning in those sort of cases, if anybody's interested in coming to the air wing, the logistics in terms of communications and timing, and having an understanding about how long will this actually take? How long does it take to secure an airway on the ground, and how long does it take to actually work out how to belay a patient down through 45-degree terrain with tiny little trees to hang on to, and hold him there securely with mountaineers who you'd never trained with before. And so I was on the ground. It took me about nearly 2 hours to get the patient ready to lift, and then we lifted, and then I found myself flying sort of 400 or 500 feet up.
But then you're also thinking in the back of your mind, this isn't the end of it. It's not a broken ankle. There was never a high five moment then. Then we landed, and I've got this critically unwell patient. So I've now got an RSI with a crewman that's never done an RSI before, and a pilot helping me with the airway, which was filling with blood. So we're doing bag valve mask on his side. So it was one of those ones where we gave the drugs and then lay him on his back just as he muscle relaxed, and then quickly intubate him. So first pass before
intubation.
Before the tide comes back in with
first pass intubation and get all that sort of stuff sorted out. But they stick in your mind. Firstly, for me, from perspective, and you talked about the time, how long you were with a critically injured patient, and how long it took to get someone from the Grampians to the Alfred. You could nearly drive there in 2 hours. 3 hours.
Yeah.
And from the time he was injured, 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning, till he arrived at the hospital was about 6 hours later or something. And you've got to try and we've got to, in your mind, you're thinking this is just taking too long. But I couldn't have done it any quicker.
The tyranny of distance. You can't.
No. And then chuck in the fact that he's critically injured.
So Bendigo's a bit flatter, and
Yeah.
with 4 you're not getting across to the Grampians, obviously.
I've done a few. I've done winches there since.
Okay.
So Hems 3, I thought this would be great. I don't have to do any more winching because the winching doesn't really. I'm not that interested in doing the winching.
Yeah.
I know it's part of the job, and I spend a lot of time preparing and training, and I train really hard for the winching. I do a lot of work, preparation work for it. But I'd be happy never to do another one as long as I live.
Well, it's not natural, is it, to step outside the aircraft that's
I've always had
flying?
a heightened awareness of what could go wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had spins with stretchers. I've had a few things happen to me winching, and I thought, oh, that's so close. It's the fine line, and there's so many moving parts to it as well. And we can only really control a small amount of that. And if it all starts to go wrong, and it can go wrong really quickly.
And you're pretty helpless when you're attached down there, aren't you?
Yeah, you are, yeah. Especially, you go, those guys at Micah 2, at Hems 2 particularly, are doing those, getting out to those old growth forests and things. There's 200 feet of cable. I still marvel at the skill of the air crew that we work with, though. I remember relating a story about doing a night winch in an old in NSP, which is a heap of junk, without NVGs, about a 180-foot winch into a waterfall at Turpin Falls, just near Kyneton. And Adam Coffey was crewing, and I think it was Heath Scanlon, and they came above me. It was a stretcher winch with a tagline, and I did the tagline, so I sent the stretcher up on its own. But they put the hook in my hand.
Wow.
People sort of say, how good are they? Well, try and do that in a helicopter, like NSP. We're not talking about and the augmentation of controls and all that sort of stuff is not as anywhere near as the new machines that we've got. That's a really hard thing to do. That's real skill.
They're a pretty amazing group of people, aren't they? And certainly one of the things you enjoy, the pilots and the crewmen, aren't they?
I was going to stop flying probably about 5-10 years ago. That was my plan for about 10 years. Yeah. And then go back and do something else. But I found myself in really good company. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the mental gymnastics of it, and the satisfaction you get when you get it right. It's really quite a thing. I've not experienced it anywhere else in ambulance. The jobs are so complex. They're so long often, so that long, complex, multifactorial, and then when you got to, you're really seeing very dynamic patients. They change, and they have to change the plan. You have to change the reassessment. Has to change, and every now and then you get a set of obs that are both the same. And you go, that's not right. Hang on a minute. I've got to check. I better hand check that. The patient hasn't deteriorated. So. Yeah, and this is one of the things that attracted me to the work in the first place. Anyway, the cutting edge nature of the work.
How do you like? You've really only just left. How do you compare it to when you started? Is it same patients, different aircraft, different equipment?
It's the aircraft is better.
Yeah,
no doubt about that. The a little bit of extra speed. I don't think it's making much difference because all I did with the extra speed was actually send us longer distances. So we're doing jobs now that would have been done in fixed wing. Yeah. And now we're transporting patients an hour and a half in a helicopter, which to me is a bit dumb. But when a fixed wing can do it in 40. Yeah. But the machines are better. I think they're safer in terms of the aviation side of it. They're better. They're safer. But the equipment has changed, so the skill set is actually increased exponentially. There's some really great things in there, like finger thoracostomy. Years and years that I struggled away with badly chest-injured patients trying to keep chest drains patent out the front of the chest when the chest was full of blood, and I was trying to oxygenate people that was very difficult, and then still maintain perfusion. And we were told not to use sort of, infusions to support blood pressure. We weren't allowed to use adrenaline or NORAD. That was banned in trauma. So we were arriving routinely with patients with a BP 80, 90 after 3 or 4 litres of crystalloid, and it really massively unstable patients. And they would do a finger thoracoscopy, put chest drains in, and the patients had settled down, which to me was just terribly frustrating. So the finger thoracoscopy thing, it doesn't take very long. It's not a very hard skill to learn. It's a pretty easy thing to muck up.
There's also, you find it more definitive too, like.
What I've found is the flight time. So we used to put pneumocats in. We'd intubate people, put pneumocats in, bit of air, bit of blood. The patients would look better, SATs and that sort of stuff. And you could target management for reduction of secondary brain injury, which was the key to a lot of the stuff we were doing. But then the flights were problematic, changes in air pressure and all that sort of thing. You read in the text would tell you that an altitude of 1,000 or 2,000 feet doesn't make any difference. It does. Absolutely. With a chest injured patient or with a COPD patient or whatever, that took 1,000 or 2,000 feet, forget the textbook. And that was one of the other things I learned when I first started out there. People like Samsey and those sort of guys said, forget the textbooks. Aeromedical, it doesn't follow necessarily. And the patients haven't read the text either.
I'm a ALS paramedic. I'm enjoying the job, say such as your son. What do you think someone is? If someone ultimately wants to do the air wing, what have they got to do along the track, do you think, for them to make themselves ready and be aware?
Be good basic. So good basic AMBOs become good basic MICA people, and good basic MICA people become good air wing people.
Yeah.
I think that you've got to be really good practical skills, and the only way to do that is to practice it. I still, up until I left, was spending hours a week in the training room. I have a feeling in my own practice, because you can't talk for everyone, but I had to maintain the skill levels to a point where I could do it without thinking about it. Because what I found was if I had to sit down and start thinking about what I was doing, like in terms of skills, it took my concentration away from the most important thing, was with the patient. And when I used to see, I used to train MICA flight paramedics, and sometimes you'd see them really fixated on a skill or a procedure or doing something, and they completely lost situational awareness with the patient. And the patient would sort of often actually start drifting out from under them and be away 100 metres, 200 metres down the road, and they were still there mucking around doing something with like an orogastric, and you're sitting there going, where's the patient? So if you've got good skills and you maintain that, and you can carry out those skills without even thinking about them at the required standard, it allows you to remain focused on the patient. The patient doesn't get out from underneath you.
Do you think also, as much as it's a little bit hard, you have to stand back and be a little bit, as Michael Wells said, the conductor a little bit at some of these jobs? As much as you want to get involved, you're like, if I get stuck on that airway...
I'd absolutely agree with that 100%. So I'm a great delegator at jobs. So I'll often stand back, but I'll talk too. So I actually tell people what I'm thinking. I think that's a huge key to it. You have to do that without being condescending and sound like you're a tosser. Because you can do that really badly. People you see people actually start to shift back away.
You don't want to fly off with everyone flicking you the bird.
So I think that another thing that's changed probably in the role with the MICA flight is I think that I reckon 50% of the job now is actually mentoring and teaching in the field of jobs.
Okay.
So we're going out to jobs seeing very, very junior staff at jobs that they've never seen before. And you get there, not only you have to look after the patient, but you also have to make it an opportunity to actually show them what I'm thinking, what I'm doing, and teach.
It is interesting now, isn't it, with so many students? Like in the old days, you would start somewhere busy like a Camberwell or a Preston or a Broady, whereas now you might be thrown out to a one-horse town.
Warwicknabeal.
4 days of nothing, and then all of a sudden you get the semi-trailer into the
family of five. And we see that a lot. And so then HEMS 3 particularly, I sort of started to come across this, and hopefully you don't get a lot of feedback. I don't really seek a lot of feedback to tell you the truth. It's not really part of how I go about it, but I'm hoping that people, if I got out of the machine and people saw me, they'd sort of go, oh good,
Yeah.
this will be good.
Yeah.
We might learn something here.
You're involved with the Kerrang
Yeah,
crash?
that was wildly out of control. That scene. Calvin Walsh had got there before me and probably done the back-breaking, terrible part of it. I just had multiple casualties, had to sort out quite a few and work out what was going on. That
You
was just
RSI'd one, didn't you?
Yeah, a lady that had really quite severe facial trauma, but with an altered conscious state, and she was also continuously vomiting.
Just to make it a bit more
GCS of
fun
sort
for
of 10, 11, so hot, reasonably intact neurologically, but very, very drowsy, but then just continuously vomiting and struggling to clear her airway. But she was quite a big lady as well, no neck and small mouth. And I thought, we had an hour flight back to Melbourne in the Dauphine.
Was that the old Dauphine?
No, it was the G model.
Right.
Yeah, not Charlie model, no.
Yeah.
With the water feature.
Yeah.
When it rained, the water all ran down the centre pillar onto the avionics panel. No, in the G model, we had to. It took us 20 minutes to completely strip it of everything so that we could actually get to Kerrang and back, because there was very little fuel in between. We possibly had to stop at Bendigo on the way back, but we actually got airborne and we flew all the way to Melbourne on the one tank of gas.
So now, next phase for you?
Retirement.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lots more time with the family.
What are you going to miss?
Man standing next to you.
Yeah.
That's probably poorly put. The person standing next to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Found myself in very good company in the last 20 years, particularly in my career. Probably the best people I've worked with in my working life, which has been 45 years now. I'll miss them. I don't think the work so much. No, not really.
I've done enough.
I've done enough. Seen enough. I don't think I've got nothing else to prove from that perspective. I didn't really see it as a job that I had to prove myself anyway. But I think I'll just miss the people I was working with. I think they kept me flying for probably a lot longer than I intended.
It's a pretty unique environment, isn't it? A really real sense of camaraderie and a group of people. I
had a function here a few weeks ago with some, people from HIMSS 3 people and some mates and stuff, and I just said it was an opportunity for me to say thank you. And one of the points I made was that we used to go into some terrible situations, and often people would physically back and away. Like we arrived and they physically stepped back and away and said, "It's all yours." And you turn around and the people you're working with, they did not budge. They were standing right there, had your six, really looked after you. But I think the other thing that I'll miss is and I said, went around that particular night and spoken to a lot of people since. I just said the regard and the care that we took of one another was really probably the thing that will stick with me the most. Work with people that really cared about one another and had regarded one another, and we, those times, and you would know where you get home after a really bad job, haven't really spoken to anybody, and all of a sudden you're getting a few messages on your phone, phone call the next day, heard you had that job yesterday, you're all right,
The unofficial peer
network, and that sort of kindness and regard, that will be a thing that will stick with me for a long time, I think.
Do you carry any scars out of the job?
Have to. I think we all do. I think we've all, I think we've all got a degree of post-traumatic stress. We would have to have. It's human nature. But you must develop ways of dealing with that. You have to develop methods, your own ways of doing exercise, and other interests and stuff like that. And I really loved that. I had a sister that worked with Vietnam vets, and she said they were taught when they were in service to just put all these things in the back of your mind and forget about it. And I think that's wrong.
Came rushing out.
It came years later. They just had corrupted hard drives, and when they turned their computer on, at least the computer started flashing images at them, and they had these terrible sensations. I always had a thought that you should develop a way of going through all of these really terrible things we do, and putting it into perspective and rationalising it, And I think you should really let all the really terrible things that we see become part of who you are, and don't be afraid of that. It certainly makes you a better operator. It certainly encouraged me to spend a lot more time in the training room, just honing those skills and getting it all right, yeah.
And the son's now in the job? How long's he been in for?
Ben's nearly 10 years.
Wow.
He'll be coming up on his national medal, I guess.
Is he interested in taking a similar path to Dad?
No, I don't think so, no. I think he's quite happy where he is, and the role he's got. He just trains students one after the other.
Yeah.
He loves that. He loves training. He's quite different to me, very academic, really quite a logical, methodical sort of operator, I think. We have wonderful conversations about work. He asked me about a job and he said, he looks at me and goes, how the hell did you work that out? The way that you think, and we laugh, about it a lot. But yeah, I would love to be getting trained by him.
Did you have the pleasure of doing any jobs with him?
No, I didn't.
Right.
No.
Where is he located?
At Sunbury.
Sunbury, okay.
Yeah.
So he would have done jobs with Airwing?
Yeah, he has, yeah. And sometimes I say, in interesting cases, he said, I did a job had the helicopter the other day.
Yeah.
I ran into such and such, He's always really quite interested in it. He suffers a bit from, he doesn't look very much like me. My youngest boy does, but apparently when he speaks and facial expressions and the animation around,
very similar.
And people turn around and go, "You must be Justin Nunan's son." The facial expressions and the way that he speaks is apparently very, very similar.
Justin, thanks for your time today.
Yeah, cool.
We don't speak to enough people like you because you've given more than half your life to ambulance, and you've given more than half of that life to Micah and our ambulance.
Yeah.
And we really appreciate your time and thank you for your service.
Oh, mate, no worries. Thank you.
Thanks,
Cheers.
Justin.
See you, mate.
Thanks for listening today. We're glad you could join us. For more information on today's episode, previous episodes and upcoming episodes, please go to @the Podcast on Instagram. Also our YouTube channel, The Podcast with Ross Pollard, as well as Facebook, The Facts. And please get in contact with us. If you are an extraordinary person, you know an extraordinary person, or you've been in an extraordinary situation.